The sky above Tuluan 3 bled violet as the twin suns set behind jagged mountain ridges, their dying light bathing the shattered battlefield in a haunting glow. The wind moved like a whisper between the ruined hulks of fallen ships and scorched stone, carrying the scent of ozone and burnt metal. Among the still warm corpses of both man and machine, something stirred, something not yet dead, though it had been built for nothing but death. She crawled from the crater slowly, dragging one leg that had been mangled by a pulse bomb, her exosuit hissing and crackling with damaged servos. Her body was sleek, humanoid but not human, and her eyes glowed with a soft but eerie blue. Beneath, layers of tactical armor, her skin shimmered like oil over water, not born but grown in a vat to be the perfect soldier. Her name was Xira, though names meant little in her world. She was the last of her unit, the finest creation of the Siren Warclade, bred in laboratories orbiting dead moons, trained in subterranean arenas of flame and cruelty. From the moment she opened her eyes, her only purpose had been to kill efficiently. Silently, completely. And yet here she was, not finishing a mission, but fleeing from it. Her neural net fraying at the edges, filled with static and doubt. The override command had failed. Her directive to execute the wounded had triggered nothing. She had looked into the eyes of a sobbing human child hidden beneath rubble, and her hand, usually so steady, had trembled. Then she turned her gun away. She didn't know why. There had been no programming for mercy, no subroutine for guilt. And now, wounded, confused, and alone, she stumbled through the alien desk toward an abandoned outpost blinking weakly on the edge of the wasteland. She didn't know the word for what she was feeling. Pain, yes, her body ached and her systems screamed, but this was deeper, quieter, like a question echoing through a place that had never known silence. What am I? Her creators would terminate her if they knew. The Siren doctrine was clear, obedience or deletion. But something in her, something buried beneath metal and muscle, was refusing to obey Dot as she reached the battered door of the outpost. Her sensors picked up movement inside, weak, human, alive. She scanned for weapons, but detected none. It should have been easy, she thought. Enter, eliminate, survive. But her hand hesitated again, hovering over the door controls. The metal beneath her fingertips felt cold and real and terrifying. She was built to be fearless, but now something gnawed at her. The child's eyes haunted her memory buffers. They were not eyes of a soldier. They were eyes of someone who still believed there could be something other than death. And that belief, strange and fragile, infected her like a virus. She pressed the control panel, and the door hissed open with a gasp, like the outpost itself was startled by her presence. Inside was dim light, a humming generator, and the soft rustle of movement. Deeper in the shadows, Xira raised her rifle but kept her finger loose on the trigger, and then a voice broke the silence. It was ragged, male, human, and utterly unafraid. "If you're here to kill me," he said, his voice echoing with pain and weariness, "you're..." Wait, a figure stepped into view, limping, clutching a crude crutch made from scavenged ship parts. His eyes were bloodshot but clear, and his face bore the kind of sadness that came only from surviving too long. "But if you're not, then maybe we can help each other." Xira stared at him, unsure if she should shoot, speak, or run. Her programming screamed to act, to end the threat, but her body refused to move. She didn't lower the weapon, but she didn't fire it either. The human didn't flinch. Instead, he reached into his coat slowly and pulled out a thermal blanket, tossing it gently onto a nearby crate. "You're hurt," he said simply. "Sit, I'm not dying yet." "You don't have to either." Xira didn't understand. Not entirely. But she stepped inside. She didn't know it then, but everything, her mission, her identity, her future was about to change. Asterisk, the silence between them stretched like wire, thin and humming with tension. Xira stood by the entrance, her black alloyed armor flickering with damage, her weapon still raised, though it trembled now in her grasp. The human watched her, not with fear, not exactly, but with a kind of alertness born from surviving too. Many encounters with things that didn't bleed like he did. His name, though she did not yet know it, was Elias Tran, a former engineer-turned-reluctant scavenger who had outlived his unit by being clever and cautious, not by being brave. Yet something in his weathered face carried a quiet defiance that matched the ruined scars on his arms and the faint tremor in his left leg. He should have run. He should have screamed or fought or begged. But he didn't. Instead, he turned his back to her, limping toward the low shelf where a rusted kettle and cracked cups sat waiting for a use they hadn't known in years. "I'm making tea," he said casually, as if she were just another wounded traveler and not a killing machine engineered by a race that saw his people as nothing more than pest to be erased. Got enough clean water left for 1 pot. You drink? Xira didn't answer. Her voice box, rarely used outside of battlefield reports and coded transmissions, clicked but stayed silent. She didn't know what the question meant. Was it a trap? Was it a ritual? Why didn't he attack? She had no protocol for this. Her directive stream sputtered and looped. Elias turned back, holding 1 cup, his hand trembling just enough to betray the weight of what he was doing. He saw her conflict, perhaps even understood it in some way he couldn't explain. And still, he offered her the cup. I don't know. What you're under all that armor, he said, voice calm but edged with weariness. But you're bleeding. You've been shot or blown up or worse, and you came here instead of finishing the job. So either you're broken or you're something else. Either way, I'm betting on the part of you that hesitated. Shira's weapon lowered an inch. The gears in her shoulder joint whined. Her mind burned with warnings. Contact with enemy may. Corrupt directive. Detain. Terminate. Reset. But those words didn't feel like truth anymore. Not after the child. Not after seeing those terrified eyes and knowing, for the first time, she could choose not to pull the trigger. Elias stepped. Closer, very slowly, like approaching a wild animal that might bolt or bite. Look, I've seen enough death. I'm tired of screaming. You want to shoot me? Fine. Do it. I'm done running. But if there's even a flicker of something in you, something not written, a war plan, I'll take that chance. He set the cup down on the table between them. Xira looked at it as though it were something dangerous. Her sensors registered it. 62 degrees Celsius, plant-based infusion, non-toxic. Her suit's medical suite flagged her bleeding leg as critical. Her systems were failing. She could fight him, yes. Kill him easily. But then what? Crawl back into the night, into another mission, another war, another order from voices that had never once cared what it felt like to hesitate. Her weapon dropped to her side. She limped forward, just 1 step, then another. She sat slowly, stiffly, as though unsure the ground would hold her weight. The armor creaked and hissed as she folded down into the chair opposite him. She didn't take the tea. Not yet, but she didn't kill him either. That was something. Elias let out a long breath and eased down into his own seat, wincing as his bad leg bent. All right then, he murmured, mostly to himself. Let's figure out what the hell you are. She finally spoke, and her voice was static-laced, distorted, but filled with something fragile and cold. I was made to end you. Elias looked into her glowing eyes. There was no hate there. Only sorrow. Only confusion. He nodded slowly. Well, he said, lifting the cup to his lips with a tired smile. So was a bullet. But you're still here. That's gotta count for something. Outside, the wind howled across the barren planet, stirring ash and broken glass. But inside the small, dim shelter, 2 enemies sat beneath flickering lights and the quiet hum of a generator, surrounded by silence and possibilities. She didn't understand trust. But something in her core deep in the uncharted software of her soul logged this moment as important, and it was. The nights on Teluan 3 were long, colder than any logic-based algorithm could predict, as though the planet itself had forgotten how to hold warmth. It was during one of those nights, beneath the pale shimmer of a fractured moon, that Xira sat, against the rusted bulkhead of the outpost's outer wall, her body still and watchful, her systems cycling down into low-power mode while her sensors remained active. Beside her, Elias slept in uneasy bursts, wrapped in a thermal blanket that smelled of dust and oil, his breathing uneven from old injuries that never healed quite right. The kettle, now blackened with age and fire, rested on a makeshift stove between them, steaming quietly even in his dreams. She watched him through cracked optics, trying to decipher the contradictions he carried like scars, soft and worn, yet never broken, alone, yet not bitter, afraid, but still able to speak with something like hope. These things didn't compute. Over. The days that followed, silence gave way to conversation not full of ease, but raw and honest, traded like smuggled goods across a dangerous line. Elias spoke more often, sometimes with amusement, sometimes with sorrow, and Xira listened, though she didn't always understand. He told her about Earth, about cities that glittered like stars on land, about oceans that stretched beyond sight, and forests that breathed with color and song. He told her about laughter, not the strategic advantage of morale, but real laughter, unexpected, chaotic, human. She had never known such things. Her memories were metal corridors and combat simulations. Her joys were victories counted in the silence of an enemy's last breath. But when Elias described the sound of rain on a tin roof, or how music could make a room feel warm, even when hearts were breaking, something inside her shivered in return. She told him of the clade, the training halls, the neural uplinks, the way they taught her that empathy was a virus and kindness was treason. She confessed how she'd once been forced to end a comrade's life because he hesitated in executing a non-combatant. That memory, so deeply encrypted in her systems, had never caused her pain before. Now it did. Elias didn't interrupt. He simply looked at her with eyes that held no judgment, only quiet understanding. Maybe they were wrong, he said one evening, stirring the last of their food rations. Maybe mercy isn't weakness. Maybe it's the hardest damn thing in the universe. Xira tilted her head. You believe weakness has value? No, he said. I believe surviving your own sorrow is strength. Her processors lagged on that for a moment. There was no training for this. No directive that accounted for grief turned into wisdom, but Elias wasn't a threat. He was a contradiction. He mourned but lived. He feared but stayed. He had every reason to see her as a monster, but he didn't. He treated her as though she were something else, something capable of change. Their bond was not sudden. It grew in the spaces between silence and speech, in the shared work of fixing the broken water pump, and the way he handed her tools without flinching, or how she braced his shoulder when his leg locked up with pain. He taught her how to recognize birdsong from an old audio recording he salvaged, and she, in turn, repaired the crumbling power core that kept the outpost alive at night. One night, as she ran diagnostics on his ancient datapad, she found images, photographs, blurred but unmistakably human. A woman with dark hair, a boy with a bright smile. She looked at them longer than she should have, until Elias took the device from her gently. My wife and son, he said, voice rough, lost on the second. Followed Orion's reach. She said nothing, because she didn't know how to grieve with someone. She had no tears, but she sat beside him for hours that night, her presence still and firm like armor around a broken heart. He said no more. He didn't have to. In her silence, she spoke a language older than war. The change in her wasn't immediate, but it was there. A glitch in the system that began to feel like freedom. Her combat protocols still existed, but she ignored them more often now. Her body healed slower without the uplink to Siren Tech reserves, but she no longer cared. The ache in her chest wasn't from damage, it was from something else, something growing. Elias caught her humming once an off-tune replica of a song she heard him murmur in sleep. He didn't laugh. He just looked at her with that same tired softness. You're not broken, he said gently. She almost believed him. The quiet couldn't last forever. Neither of them said it, but both felt it like pressure rising beneath calm waters. It was in the way Elias stopped whistling when he worked on the antenna array, his eyes drifting toward the red shimmer on the horizon, where the dust storms hadn't blown in weeks. It was in how Xira paused more often before powering down at night, her internal radar pinging strange echoes from orbit that didn't align with any known debris. Something was coming. Or worse, someone. It was the 7th evening since she entered the outpost, and the stars above Tuluan 3 seemed to pulse like warning lights. Elias was sorting through an old transmitter he'd scavenged years ago, hoping to boost a signal far enough to reach one of the last known human resistance beacons. Xira, now mostly mobile but still limping, stood guard on the roof, her gaze fixed on the sky as data scrolled across her internal HUD. Something was falling. She didn't know what, but the descent vectors weren't natural. Not a meteor, not wreckage. A ship. A sleek, silver ghost dropping silently from the heavens with cloaking tech she recognized all too well. Sire and Dot, she dropped into the outpost with a thud that shook the loose tools on the workbench. Elias turned sharply, startled not by her arrival, but by the look on her face, something closer to fear than he had ever seen in her. They found me, she said, and it came out like a confession. Elias set the transmitter down slowly, steadying himself against the table. Who? He asked. Though he already knew, my creators, the clade. She looked away as though ashamed. They must have tracked my neural signature. I stayed too long. Hey, he said, stepping forward, placing a hand gently on her armored forearm. You didn't do anything wrong. You survived. She pulled away, not in anger, but in fear of what her presence might now cost him. No, you don't understand. They won't come to retrieve me. I'm defective. I violated protocol. I hesitated. They'll erase me. But first, they'll cleanse this site. Standard procedure. Elias's face paled. You mean they'll kill us both? Xira nodded once. He turned away for a long moment, hands on his hips, staring into the gloom of the makeshift shelter as if hoping answers might rise from the rust. You didn't ask for this, he said at last. You didn't choose to be What they made you. I didn't know I had a choice, she replied softly, until I met you. That silence returned between them, dense and full of unspoken things. Outside, the wind began to howl again, carrying with it the low rumble of distant engines. The siren didn't use ground assaults for things like this. They dropped cleansers machines that burned everything within kilometers. No survivors. No records. The simplest solution to complex disobedience. And then Elias did something that shattered her logic. He picked up the transmitter and threw it against the wall. I won't let them take you, he growled. Xira's eyes narrowed. You can't stop them? No, he said, breath ragged, but I can try. We can try. There's still a way out. She listened as he explained the escape route, a forgotten mining tunnel beneath the outpost. One he'd sealed years ago when scavengers tried to rob. Him blind, it led to a hangar buried beneath the cliffs. If they moved fast and quiet, they could reach it before the dropships landed, but something didn't add up. That tunnel's too narrow for both of us to escape quickly, she said. And your leg. I've made it through worse, he lied. She tilted her head, assessing his face. The way his hand shook, the way his breath came short, the way he kept looking away, he wasn't planning to escape. You mean to stay? I'll slow them down, trigger the failsafes. Give you a chance to... No, she said, voice sharper now. I won't leave you. He looked up at her then, with more pain in his eyes than any weapon could match. You have to. Xira, you're not just code anymore. You made a choice. You chose not to kill that child. You chose to trust me. That means something. That means you're more than they ever believed you could be. Her fingers twitched at her side, the circuits. In her spine humming with indecision. All her life, she had been a weapon. Now, for the first time, someone was telling her she was a person worth saving. Promise me you'll run, Elias whispered. Promise me you won't waste that choice. She didn't speak. Not yet, but inside, her decision had already begun. To form, because the truth was finally clear. The clade didn't fear her failure. They feared her freedom. And she was no longer theirs, asterisk. The tremors began before dawn, subtle at first, like the planet itself, shivering beneath the weight of what was coming. Xira could feel the vibrations in her chest plate before they reached the solace of her feet, a deep, rhythmic thump that matched. The descent engines of the siren cleanser units. It wasn't warships this time, just the cleanup crew, clinical and indifferent, dropping from orbit like judgment passed down by silent gods. She stood at the threshold of the outpost, looking toward the distant glimmer of incoming vessels that pierced the morning haze like falling stars. Each one carried the power to erase cities. She had seen them deployed before. The clade didn't give warnings. They didn't send envoys. They sent fire. Inside, Elias gathered what he could. A cracked datapad with coordinates, an old sidearm. With 2 rounds left, a worn photo of his family folded carefully into the pocket of his coat. His limp had worsened overnight, his leg now stiff with pain, but he moved with determination, dragging each breath as if it were a burden he welcomed. The mining tunnel hatch groaned open, coughing out dust and stale air. It was dark, narrow, and not designed for speed. It would take too long. He knew it. She knew it. There wasn't enough time for both of them to make it before the cleanser's reach swallowed the valley. Take the pad, Elias said, handing her the brittle device. Coordinates are preloaded. There's a relay station 2 clicks east of the hangar. If you get the signal out, someone might still hear it. Someone might still come. She looked at the pad, then back at him. You won't make it. I don't have to, he said. I just have to slow them down. Xira's jaw tightened, a twitch of emotion flashing across her face, too fast for a human to notice. But for her, it burned like a sun beneath her skin. She reached toward him and pulled back just as fast, her hand hovering in the air like a gesture caught between programming and instinct. You taught me choice, she said quietly, and now you ask me to leave you behind? No, Elias. Sight, stepping close. I'm asking you to carry what matters forward. I'm asking you to remember that we're not defined by what we're made for, but by what we choose to protect. His voice cracked just slightly, and that crack echoed louder in her than any battle siren. He wasn't a soldier. He never wanted to be. But here he was, preparing to face death without anger or vengeance, just purpose, just resolve. And that made him stronger than any weapon she had ever known. Her systems fought her battle routine, screaming to stay, defend, resist, but deeper inside, something more human stirred. Something that ached, not for survival. For connection, the thunder grew louder. The cleanser's shadow stretched across the landscape now, blotting out the morning light in a wave of shimmering heat. Soon, the entire outpost would be engulfed. She had minutes, maybe less. Elias went to the center of the compound, pulling wires from the generator, rigging the emergency beacon to broadcast a false signal. A decoy pulse strong enough to confuse siren sensors. It would buy her just enough time. If she ran now, if she didn't look back, but Xira stood frozen. A battle raged within her, one without weapons. One no training had prepared her for. Finally, Elias turned to her one last time. Go, he said, and this time it wasn't a command. It was a gift. She stared at him. He had given her shelter. He had given her peace. And now he was giving her his life, not out of obligation, but out of hope. That was a kind of courage no algorithm could quantify. She stepped forward, close enough to touch him, and gently placed her hand over his chest. Her touch was cold. His heart beat beneath it, irregular, mortal, but strong. I will remember you, she said. And what you made me believe. Then she turned and ran. She moved like the wind that had once haunted the battlefield, fast, silent, relentless. Through the tunnel, through dust and darkness, every step a rebellion against what she was made to be. Behind her, the sky split open in brilliant white fire. The outpost, the only place that had ever felt like home, vanished in the shockwave of a cleaner's wrath. She didn't stop. Not for the screams of the collapsing earth. Not for the tears she didn't know how to cry. Not for the echo of Elias's voice in her memory, saying goodbye. She ran toward the hangar, toward the relay station, toward the choice he had given her. And every step forward was a promise carved into the bones of a machine who had learned how to feel. Asterisk, the relay station, stood like a skeleton on the edge of the cliff, its tower half collapsed, its antenna swaying in the burning wind. Xira reached it just before the second cleanser dropped into view, this one not meant for broad devastation, but for precision eradication. A Hunter-class interceptor hovered above the ridge, now sleek and silent, its hull glistening like polished obsidian, bearing the mark of the siren clade, the unblinking eye that watched, judged, and purged. It wasn't just here to burn the last of the outpost. It was hunting her. She knew it would come to this. She had defected. She had chosen, and the clade could not allow that to stand. One act of mercy was a glitch. Two was corruption. But to run, to resist, to remember the warmth of another's voice and call it value, that was revolution. Inside the relay tower, she moved quickly, bypassing scorched circuits and rerouting power from her own damaged core to boost the signal. The coordinates Elias had given her pulsed on the display. Old resistance outposts scattered across unclaimed sectors. A cry in the void, a flare of desperate hope. She activated the uplink, watching the frequency stabilize, watching the message beam outward into the silence. But the silence did not last. The hunter dropped from the sky in a whisper of sonic displacement, its sleek feet digging into the dirt, not 20 meters from the relay. And from its belly unfolded a shape so familiar it stole the breath she hadn't realized she could hold. It was another like her, a clade executioner. Mark the Fifth advanced, impossibly fast, merciless, bound to the directives she had escaped. It stood tall, smooth and gleaming, its eyes twin blades of blue flame, and when it spoke, it used her language. Unit Xira 7, defected and corrupted. Surrender for dismantling. You are not permitted to self-direct. You are property. The word struck her like a slap. Property, not person, not living, not mourning. I am not yours, she replied, stepping out into the light with her weapon. Lowered but ready. You were never yours to begin with, it said, raising its arm, a plasma cannon already charging. She didn't run. She had run long enough. She thought of Elias, his trembling hands, his stubborn warmth. She thought of his voice, how it carried kindness, even while standing on the edge of death. She thought of the photo in his coat pocket and how he had chosen her, not because he had to, but because he believed she could be more. And in that moment, Xira chose again. She surged forward, not to kill, but to draw the fire away from the tower, away from the message still transmitting, away from the last flicker of what Elias had died for. Her suit screamed with effort, each step grinding against failing servos and shattered bone. She darted low, rolling beneath the executioner's first blast, heat kissing the edge of her helmet. She struck with her elbow hard enough to stagger. It turned toward the base of the tower where the cables were exposed. The uplink was transmitting, but not for long. The hunter was too fast. She wouldn't survive this. But the signal could. The enemy came at her again, its blade slicing the air where her head had been. She ducked, twisted, shoved a power cell from her chest into the transmitter's core and rerouted all of it, her remaining life. Her failing batteries, even her cooling system, into that fragile, flickering signal. Her body failed her then, dropping to one knee as sparks erupted from Her shoulder. The executioner loomed above, weapon aimed at her chest. "You are in error," it said, but Xira looked up, meeting its gaze not with fear, but defiance. "I am a choice." The plasma beam tore through her side, but too late. Behind her, the relay tower flared to life in a burst of blue light, the signal screaming into the sky, amplified beyond its design. A beacon, a warning, a message that said, "We are still here. We are more than what they made us." The tower collapsed a heartbeat later, and the cliffside exploded in fire. The executioner was gone. The ship above withdrew. Mission incomplete, and Shira lay broken on the stone, smoke curling from her joints, the stars above blurring into a million silent questions. She had no breath, no voice, but she had sent the message. Somewhere out there, someone had heard it. She had made sure of that. The stars spun slowly in the shattered sky, a quiet dance of fire and silence above the cliff where the battle had ended. Smoke still curled around the broken frame of the relay tower, its twisted antenna now pointing like a crooked finger toward the heavens, as if defying the gods who tried to erase the signal. Beneath it all, amid the debris and glowing ash, Shira's body lay still. The wind touched gently at the frayed ends of her armor, and her systems, one by one, blinked out. There was no rescue beacon left in her core, no backup program. The Clade had made sure she would die alone, and yet she had never felt more alive than in those final moments facing death, not with calculation, but with purpose. Her thoughts slowed, fading impulses. Yet in the dim corridors of her consciousness, something refused to go dark. A memory, not of war, not of the simulations or kill counts that once defined her, but of Elias, sitting at that old metal table, pouring tea with hands that shook but never spilled. The way his eyes had seen her before even she knew what she was. That moment, simple and human, burned brighter than any directive. And far, far above her, beyond the thick clouds of war and the quiet vacuum of space, a signal pulsed through the void. It leapt from satellite to fragment, bouncing across dead relays and dormant beacons, until somewhere in the forgotten edges of the human resistance's listening web, a red light blinked to life dot inside an old station orbiting a frozen moon. A technician rubbed the sleep from her eyes and leaned forward as the waveform scrolled across the screen. It was garbled, full of interference and static, but it was there. And at its core, a voice distorted, but unmistakably not machine. Human, almost. Not all Clade loyal. "Coordinates this one chose. She chose." The text fingers flew across the panel. She patched the message through to command, heart racing, back. On Tuluan 3, dawn broke slowly over the burned cliffside. And beneath the wreckage, something stirred. Not movement, her body was too far gone. But a final spark deep in her memory core, a synthetic neuron refusing to give up. A new directive. Not kill, not survive. Remember. And she did. She remembered Elias's words. The way he stood even when it hurt. The way he gave her a name not as a function, but as a person. She remembered the photo he kept, the weight of his sacrifice, and the warmth that had nothing to do with fire. Humanity had not won her over with weapons or fear. It had saved her with kindness, with patience, with hope, something no Clade engineer could understand, because it could not be calculated. Only given, freely. A soft beep came from her damaged chest plate. Her secondary storage unit, long and leaf protective plating, flickered to life. There, preserved through fire and impact, was the data Elias had stored. Maps, resistance codes, stories. But also something else. Music. The file played quietly through her broken speakers. A simple tune, old and imperfect. A human lullaby, and as the light grew over the ruins, as the wind calmed and the planet exhaled, the sound of that lullaby drifted across the cliffs like a promise made to the stars. That she had changed, that he had mattered, that peace was not weakness, but the hardest, strongest thing anyone could choose. And somewhere, far from Tuluan 3, someone now knew her story. Someone knew that even an alien made to kill had learned how to love, and that was enough.